Good afternoon. It's Lee Cassie from Tactile Technology, and we've got our Small Business Monday. So I'm talking about data protection today, but it's focused at small businesses. So if you're in a large enterprise or a large organization that has your own IT team, this might not be of interest to you because it's specifically talking about some of the things that organizations need to do, but when they're small, it tends to be the owner of the business or someone who has a bit of know-how in the business that does all the IT work. So it's focused at that point of view. But just to give you a picture of what we've got coming up later this week. So tomorrow, what we've got is in the hot seat with Steve Jaguar of StackRock. So we're going to find out a bit Steve's background, where he came from, where he's gone to, a little bit about his technology journey with different organizations and how it started. And like I said the other day, learn a bit about him because he's an American living and working in the UK. So, let's find out how he got here, why he stayed here, and what's going to happen in the future. Also on Wednesday, we've got more of a focus on enterprise infrastructure. This time it's cloud native security. And we're going to talk specifically about risk and also compliance, because I think there's some key areas that a lot of organizations are interested. On Thursday, we've got Jonathan Sanderson, one of the Goldman Sachs 10K small business alumni members. So I went through the program myself, and what we're going to do is get a view from Jonathan of how it affected him, how his business had been operated prior to doing the Goldman Sachs program, and then afterwards what happened, how he applied that learning from the Goldman Sachs program into what he was doing. And then finally, Friday, we've got our session on environmental sensing, so understand what you can actually achieve with sensors in the environment. We're running a number of projects at the moment where people are really interested in things like air quality, temperature, humidity, and also looking out for things like people smoking and noise levels as well. So if you're interested in that, come along on Friday at 3 p.m. and you can see that. So let's kick off then. So I've got a screen share just to show you what we're talking about. And so first of all, I want to talk about a thing called RTO and RPO. So RPO, for those who are not familiar with the terminology, is a recovery point objective, and RTO is a recovery time objective. So if you can consider the point where you have the incident, where you have an outage of some kind, you get a ransomware attack, or whatever has caused you to have some problems with your infrastructure or a key component of that infrastructure, what you have is the time before it, the RPO, is how far back you need to go to recover. A lot of organizations in the past used to back up only every 24 hours. So they would have to lose effectively 24 hours worth of data at the most, but it all depended on what time the incident occurred. So if they did a backup at 1 a.m. in the morning and they had an incident at 9 a.m. the following morning, they'd have to go back 8 hours and lose 8 hours worth of the data. But also if it was quite late on an evening, they would actually go back up to 24 hours to recover. So that's how far back you need to recover. The other thing is how long it takes you to recover. So the recovery time objective is how long after the incident you back up and running again with that system or group of systems, depending on what you've lost at that time. So again, a lot of people, especially in these 80s and 90s, when I was starting out in computing, I've been in the industry about 40 years. It was a key thing was around understanding. And it was about 24 to 48 hours, because you might have, say, an IBM truck turn up that's got all the equipment in. You take out your tapes and you'd load all your tapes into that system and have it up and running within a couple of days. And that was a traditional approach to backup and recovery. Nowadays, we're looking quite differently about how we do it. So a little bit different this time. So those are key things that we need to know about, but there are a number of other things. So one of them is the granularity of things. So when we snapshot data, so take a copy of it, we need to understand the granularity, and depending on the infrastructure, that granularity is different. So some SaaS or NAS platforms, so storage area network or network attached storage, You can only actually be as granular as a logical unit of storage, so a LUN. So the whole amount of it, you have to snapshot that whole amount. So your recovery is the whole of it. So it might be a lot more than you actually need to recover. In some cases, it's a volume. So sometimes LUNs are split out into volumes, and it could be a folder or even down to a particular file. And especially with physical machines, you're tending to actually copy all the files and back up the files rather than the operating system environment. And you may have a set image that you use to actually recover the actual server or desktop machine, and then apply the files and folders back to it. But also sometimes you might only want to recover a file or a folder, because it might be someone's accidentally deleted a file or folder and need to recover that. We did something similar for a customer last week where they'd actually accidentally deleted a particular file or folder. But when we're looking at virtual infrastructure, so using things like VMware or Hyper-V on your own environments, or using them within a cloud environment or a private cloud environment delivered by one of the managed service providers, it's slightly different. Here we might be looking at snapshotting the whole virtual machine, or we might even be looking at a virtual disk. So within that virtual machine, like we'd have on a physical machine, we might have a C drive, a D drive, and an E drive. We're talking about virtual disks. So they're actual virtual versions of those disks, and we might snapshot those virtual disks as well. The other thing is, how do we recover, and what can I recover? So one of them is you could recover the complete LUN, but the trouble being is you may only want to recover one particular machine, and if you actually recover the whole LUN, you're going to have to recover everything back to that point in time. You might want to recover a complete volume, so you copy all of that back. But again, that volume might be a number of machine drives or folders that you've stored data within as well. It could be a folder. Like I said before, you want to recover some files that have been accidentally deleted, so you can recover a folder or the files and folders within them. But you could want to recover a virtual machine. So if you were in a virtualized environment on premise, so using VMware or Hyper-V, you might want to recover that virtual machine back to a particular point in time. And like I said before, that RPO is a key thing. How far back do you need to go? How often are you taking snapshots? In virtual machine environments, more people are actually snapshotting regular. So people are doing 4-hourly or hourly snapshots, but they don't keep them for a great deal of time. And we'll talk about retention in a second. But it's the whole machine, and you may go back an hour or 4 hours to recover this time. So not as much data has been lost in the time that you've been out of use with it. But it also could be one of those virtual machine disks, because maybe some data that was on one of those virtual machine disks has been corrupted, and you just want to recover the virtual machine disk and the data that resides in it rather than the whole of the virtual machine. And again, depending on the system that you've got in place, it'll allow you to do that. And you can utilize a number of things. So you could have a system that takes snapshots of all your virtual machines and recovers them using software, and that software utilizes some local storage, or it could be using a cloud storage platform for it. You could also utilize a hardware appliance, and the hardware stores a snapshot locally, and you can set a pattern, a schedule of recovery, or an SLA, which is a slightly different terminology that's utilized within backup and recovery and data protection environments. But you can also, with some systems, do constant data protection. So every time there's a change made on that system, especially systems that are very important to you with information that's updated regularly and you don't want to lose anything, you might want to go to that constant data protection point. So every time there's a change on that system, it's backed up effectively or snapshotted, so that you can recover back to a second ago if you needed to, without any loss of any data at all. So some of the things to consider then. So one is retention period. So some things you might only want to keep for hours. So if you're snapshotting, say, every minute, you might only need a couple of hours worth of those. You want to keep, years worth or months worth. Also, you might want to take a daily copy. So, as of 10 p.m. at night, and keep a day of that and keep that a particular amount of time. So you might want to keep that for a week or a month. You might want to do a weekly copy, so end of the week, what it looks like on a Friday, and keep that for maybe a month. And then you also maybe want to do a monthly and keep that for a number of years. And then finally, annual ones, especially around times of important things happen, like your end of year point or a big billing run point. You may want to take a snapshot then and keep them for a number of years. Some people have compliance pieces as well. So if you're in the financial services industry, commonly you need to keep data for about 7 years. Some legal practices need to be 10 years. And especially if you're working with people, so things like medical liability legal work, it's commonly around about 50 to potentially 100 years, because it's the life of the individual that you might need to keep the data for as well. So those retention periods are both operational but also from a compliance perspective, so you've got to consider both sides of it. Also, you've got local copies, and many very small businesses might utilize removable drives, and they stick them into their server each day. They do a backup onto it and they take it home and they swap over between two. So they've got a local copy and a remote copy. But also you might want to utilize the ability to replicate. So some software systems and also some storage systems allow you to replicate data. So take a snapshot and replicate it to another site, or replicate it to a cloud service and keep a copy there. So you've always got a second copy. In the past, in the old days, we would tend to have two types, and we utilize tapes for an archive perspective as well as a secondary piece. Some people would keep those in fireproof safes on site, so if there was a disaster like a fire or a flood, they would be protected in that safe, and also they're locked away so people couldn't get access to them. But one of the things about these local and remote copies, if you get a ransomware attack and you've only got a local copy that's actually on the same machine that you actually have the ransomware attack, there is a good chance that someone's going to encrypt those files and they won't be usable to recover with. So that ransomware attack will be successful for the hacker, because you won't be able to take your backup and recover from it, because the local copy is local to them. They can access it because they've got access to your machine, and they can encrypt that file, and then there's no way that you can recover. And we've had incidents of that with people we know recently. So it is something that happens, and we encourage customers to have both local and remote copies and do automation around it, because if you're relying on people to change drives and take them home, there's a chance that they may not get taken home, and you end up with a situation that you can't recover from where you were. If you've got multiple sites, you can use those secondary sites for your effectively remote copy. So between the two sites or between multiple sites, you can put copies between them. So replicate between them, and you've got other copies that you can recover from. But also it gives you the opportunity to recover to those sites with your disaster recovery capability. One thing a lot of people don't think about is these software as service services that we're utilizing these days. So a lot of people are using things like Office 365 Mail, Google Mail, and other alternatives, Dropbox, many other things. But if you're utilizing something like Office 365 Mail, OneDrive, and also SharePoint, that is not being backed up for you by anyone else. So don't think that Microsoft are backing that up for you, because they're not. Now, they're protecting the environment as much as they can, but you need to actually take copies of it and back those up, just in case you have an issue and you end up accidentally deleting, or you end up with a situation where someone accesses it and encrypts all your files. You're going to have real difficulties getting to that information. So again, you need to consider how you protect the data that's within your software service services you're utilizing within your business as well. Archiving is slightly different, because backup and recovery is looking at, we've had an incident and we want to recover to a point in time, and it might be, it's normally very quickly after the incident, that RPO, so a shorter term back as possible to recover. But archiving is for a different reason. It might be that someone comes to you after 5 years and says, I want to see all the records that relate to me over that period of time. So you might want to have to go through that archive and pull back all specific records. Or you might want to go to a particular version of a document that was created maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So this is much more long term, and it's more focused around files and folders rather than the actual machines that they reside on. Archiving can be done locally, and people utilize a variety of technologies to archive using NAS and SAN type technologies. They also use cloud services as well. So Amazon Web Services S3 platform and also Glacier are a couple of areas where people are utilizing for archiving. So again, you need to consider what the retention period is for that. How long do I want to keep files for an archive perspective, rather than just for recovery purposes? And that disaster recovery. So how am I going to do that? Am I going to use, one of my sites as my disaster recovery capability? Am I going to have those sites as active environments? So both are utilized for production workloads, and they're running there. So we've got applications running on both sites, but they back up to each other and replicate. And if there is a failure, we can utilize the same infrastructure in one of the sites to run both sets of infrastructure. So you need to have a little bit more capacity there to be able to achieve it, or you can actually have a limited number of machines running to be able to give you your basic systems to keep you up and running. So that's an active site. Older organizations might have had proper DR sites. That's more of an active passive environment. So we've got our active environment, and then our passive environment is just where we've got our DR. So we replicate to there, and we only actually invoke it on that passive environment, and it becomes active when we've had a problem, or if we're testing a recovery point. And then finally, cloud is becoming a big thing for organizations as their DR capability. So it could be private cloud. So organizations like Rackspace, ourselves, and a number of others provide these managed service capabilities for backup and recovery, and also DR. But you could also utilize it for your own recovery. So it depends on the software that you're using or the appliances you're using. These can actually copy versions of your virtual machines into that cloud environment, and then if required, you can actually fire them up as your disaster recovery capability. So this is where the site you're operating from cannot be used because you may have a flood or a fire or some other reason you can't get there. So disaster recovery becomes the only way to do that. You may also hear of another terminology called business continuity, BC. So business continuity is where there's no real change between the disaster and the recovery. So effectively, you continue to operate even though you've had the disaster, and there's no gap between the disaster and the recovery point. And that's a real difference between business continuity and disaster recovery. And it's not always tied to technology. Some of it's about people and process and what you do to ensure that happens, that consistent business continuity. So I'll open that up to any questions. So if anybody's got any questions or anything on what I've covered so far, I just wanted to, cover some of the basics this week, and then next week we'll go into a little bit more depth about what we can achieve with these type of solutions, because a lot of small businesses don't really understand what they can achieve with their current infrastructure, and they do rely on third parties. So IT guys that go in there maybe once or twice a month to see what's happening, and predominantly they're going there when it's broken. They're not going there to make sure it's working. They're actually going there when it's broken. So it's very reactive. Whereas, you might want to have a bit more of a proactive work on things to ensure that everything is working for you at all times. But anyway, thank you very much for your time today. I just need to stop my sharing on here and drop back to a single screen. And like I said, come back and see us tomorrow, 3 o'clock. We've got Steve Jaguar in the hot seat, learning a little about him and his background, especially if you're interested in cloud native security, because that's a big area of his. So please join me tomorrow at 3 o'clock, and I hope to see you then. Thank you.